go. So Lynn's in charge, really.
Not really, no. Okay, then.
So if we leave it till, we'll start at 6:05.
Okay.
Good evening, Carmel.
Evening, Maggie. You're all right.
I've actually get changed into my night clothes, so I'm keeping my camera off. I'm just chilling out tonight. I'm chilling out. There's 1,001 things to do, so I'm moving the laptop into the kitchen with me now. So I'll turn off the mic.
Fair play. I do like a bit of multitasking. But it is the evening, so I don't see why anybody should be in formal wear at this time of night.
That's right. That's right. I've put, that sounds awful, I put my husband in bed because he's had this accident, which I know you know about, Carmel. So I said to him, it's either after 8 or now. So he said he'll go now. So I thought, do you know what? I'm going to get in my night clothes as well. So I will still be here in the background. All right. Bye.
Fair play.
See you, Kate.
And I think that might be one of the reasons why I am single, is because I can't find a husband compliant enough to go to bed when I tell him. So welcome, Maggie.
Also, in order to sort of, to meet the standards of the RCN's diversity agenda, can we all make a declaration whether you're fully clothed or just got pajama bottoms on?
I'm not saying.
Hi, Dean.
Hi, Dean.
Right, everyone.
So for those, if I just say, for those of you who have just joined, who may not have heard, I hope you're all happy that this meeting is recorded. If you could just, if you put your hand up if you're not happy, for those of you who just, no, that's, everybody's happy then. Okay.
Well, it's 6:05. This is Liverpool, and it's Tuesday night hustings at the RCN, and I'd like to, and I'm going to hand over to and how we're going to play this is that I'm going to keep an eye on the meeting chat. So if you want to ask a question, raise your hand, and I'll keep a list of people's hands and the order, and I then will just give Carmel a name, and she can introduce you. But Carmel is our chair for tonight. So without much ado, I'm going to hand over to Carmel.
Thank you very much, Mike. So yeah, I'm Carmel. I am chair of Greater Liverpool and Knowsley branch, and chair of the North West board. Newly elected and still getting my head around that one. So forgive me if everything is not as smooth as maybe you were expecting. Should we have an invite from everybody to say hello and say who they are? If I shout your name out and you just tell us, say are we hello, and then we can get onto our candidates. Richie.
Hi everyone, Richard Williams, and I'm the education link for the branch. I'm a senior lecturer at Edgehill University, and I'm the practice learning lead for student nurses and midwives.
Thank you. Victoria? Full Sunday name. Move you.
Sorry, Vicky Carroll and the dog barking. So I'm secretary for the branch, and I'm also a specialist nurse tissue donation NHSBT.
Thank you. Dean?
Evening, everyone. Dean Mcshane. I'm a mental health senior lecturer at Liverpool John Moores, and I do all of the wonderful social media stuff for the Greater Liverpool Knowsley branch.
Lovely. Lynne?
Put my camera on briefly. Hi, I'm Lynne Clarkson. I'm senior officer, and I have the pleasure of having GLK as my branch in the region. So I'm the luckiest officer. Thank you.
No irony there, I hope. Maggie, do you want to say hello?
I'll still leave the camera off. I'm Maggie Heaton. I'm the chair of Lancashire West, and I'm chair of the UK Stewards Committee.
Lovely, thank you. Margaret?
Sorry, munching away on an apple.
Margaret Dowd, member from Merseycare.
Lovely. Suzanne? You're not moved.
Remember, I haven't been doing this. I've been off. Hi, I'm Suzanne.
Lovely. Let me see who else is there. Denise Kelly? Have we lost Denise?
Denise?
Mute.
Are you there, Denise? Okay. Naomi?
Yeah, hi, I'm Naomi. I'm a renal nurse and Safe Staffing Link for our branch, and I also sit on the UK Safety Committee.
Lovely, thank you. Rosemary?
Hi, I'm a member of Cheshire East, well, as many as there are of us, not many, branch, and an activist and a retired member.
And Mike?
Yeah, I'm a little known RCN student safety rep and sits on the trade union committee. Very quiet and shy, and retiring.
Yeah.
Tonight.
Look at all the nods on this call, and that's all I'm going to say on that. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. So we like to engage people in Greater Liverpool and Knowsley, and that's kind of what we've been banging on about for a number of years. And so we have a branch plan that we would like a link member in every organisation across our patch. So we like to make sure that we can get hold of people and that we can hear our members' voices, because if we are the voice of nursing, then you can't do anything unless you're listening to people. So that's kind of our branch ethos. And along those lines, we'd kind of said, well, we've got a presidential election coming up, so it would be nice to hear from all our candidates. So welcome and thank you very much for giving us your time this evening. So if we give you a couple of minutes each to say hello and who you are and why you're running for president. So I'm going to go from the top of my screen. So Maria.
Oh, really? Thanks. Well, good evening, everybody, and thank you very much for inviting me. So the last time I was in Liverpool, it was Congress, and for many Liverpools before then, it's been Congress. So it's very strange to see everybody virtually when I'm used to seeing you in person every year. But there's lots of reasons why I'm standing. Is one, I think I'm a very grounded member. I think the other thing is, though, I'm very keen on activism and empowerment and empowering the members. And I think I was recently doing some reflection, really, partly for my revalidation. And I was asking myself how nurses can become empowered to influence and be more collective rather, by bringing individuals together as much. So what you're doing is very much sort of in my field, really. And I think although the RCN is the most popular nursing union, but I'm not always sure it's recognised by politicians as such, or only when it suits their particular agenda. So for me, for members to be active and vocal is really important. But for me, the president needs to be active and vocal as well and speak up for those that perhaps may not be able to speak up. I think nurses and most active members really do work together. But there's so many people we don't reach. Now that's for lots of different reasons. And there's that majority to wake up, get empowered and empower the RCN, because that's who they are. But it's how we, as the active members, can actually reach out and do that. And it's trying to use all those different avenues. And I watched the virtual march the other evening, and I thought, well, that was quite innovative. It was new, it was different, and we need to do so much more about it. What we don't do is spend enough money on our technology and our different ways of reaching out. So I think I've got I'm a bit of a techie, I'm afraid, as Mike knows, and I work on rostering and all those systems that everybody loves. But I really like technology. I really do. And I think we could use it so much better. And what a difference a year makes. What a difference a year makes is how we have moved forward so quickly on that agenda itself. And we can do so much more. And I know that others, feel likewise that we could do that. I think the other thing that I am really standing by is that I want to see
those governance reviews enacted. I want to see them in place, and I want to see our members far more involved in how those are taken forward. And that's not only at committees. We have got plenty of lay members out there who are subject experts in their own field, who could contribute more, who might not want to be a steward, they might not want to be a rep, but they would contribute if they could. And for me, somebody like some of our retired members could do that. Some our ex-presidents can, our ex-chairs can, our ex-council members can, and they need that voice and that bringing together. And I'd quite like to see how we could do that. Anybody who knows me knows I'm a European and I'm an internationalist. And we can see from, again, this last year, where many of us have suffered, our international colleagues are really quite important to us, and we need to care for them. And we need to make them feel included. And they may see benefits of outside there that we can't, and we still don't use them enough. So I know Denise particularly is very keen on the diversity agenda, and so am I, because what we have shown is the diversity of nursing as a whole contributing this last year. As I said, and also we've seen how it's suffered. And long COVID is a real thing. It's here. And we need to be fighting for those members who have got long COVID and fighting for services to bring them back and to compensate those who have suffered an industrial injury with COVID this last year. And I suppose that's me, really. I'm sort of a doer, not a talker. I do like to get stuck in, but I actually believe in speaking up, and that's truth to power. Say it as it is. Don't keep quiet. And there's sometimes you can be diplomatic and politically aware, but sometimes you just have to say it as it is and hold people to account. And I'd like to see a bit more of that. So that's me.
Lovely, thank you very much. Okay, so next in my screen, Denise, you're right in the middle there, so I'll go to you next.
Thanks very much, and a huge thank you to you for inviting me. I wish I was in Liverpool, actually, and I think one of the positives of the opportunity to talk on Teams is to be able to do this. So part of the fact I would obviously much prefer to be with you in person, at least we can do this. So one of the reasons that I want to stand as president, I think I know some of you, I've been around quite a long time around the RCN, but I pride myself on I've probably done nearly every part of various roles across nursing. I actually started my career in the NHS as a cleaner while I was at college, and I kind of feel that I've done many of the jobs, and I don't think I've ever forgotten what it feels like to be, you know, on the front line, whether you're a care assistant or student nurse, etc. And for me, the pandemic has been a moment to do a real step back, because I was talking to a range of colleagues recently, and what's very interesting is the diversity of the profession. My belief is that nurses are everywhere. Everywhere you look, from preconception to end of life, you see nurses. I don't think they're always as visible as they need to be. And I was talking to a friend of mine who has been working in palliative care, the impact of the COVID and the non-COVID patients on that whole group of staff, care homes as well. I've got another friend who's come out of retirement, who's doing the guidance on care homes. Another colleague of mine working in universities, been working with the release of students. And more recently, I volunteered, well, I put myself forward to be a vaccinator in my spare time, and I met somebody in the training department that's written the modules of the COVID vaccinations and the anaphylactic shock, etc. And I think for me, it just shows you the power that the Royal College of Nursing has across every aspect of nursing, and the opportunity of a collective voice for the profession and to really show what nurses can do. I think it's made nursing have a much higher profile, but equally, whilst we are attracting more people in this profession, I think the issues around retention are really, really stark. I think that for me, a focus on recruitment retention is absolutely essential. We've obviously got the pay campaign at the moment, but there are real issues about how this connects to being safe care for patients, because a lot of nurses are working with not enough staff, and actually the shortage of nurses going forward, if we don't do something about this, is absolutely critical. As far as anybody that knows anything about what I'm passionate about, is I've done quite a lot of work on being fair and fair processes for staff, and how we can look after staff, particularly when they're involved in incidents, and make sure that we don't have variation across the NHS. And for me, that is absolutely critical, because we lose nurses in that process. And I think that's even more stark around the equality, diversion and inclusion agenda. And finally, for me, I feel absolutely passionately that we need the Royal College of Nursing to align and balance the professional aspect and the trade union aspect. I think they're absolutely codependent on each other. Nurses want to be supported, they want to be remunerated, not reliant on benefits. I have been a single kind of wage earner for many years through my career, and we need to bring nurses in and we need to keep them. So for me, I think there's more to be done around the alignment of the two key arms of the RCN, and for me that would be critical for me to get people behind into a shared vision, because valued supported nurses deliver safe patient care.
Lovely, thank you very much. And last but not least, Rod Thompson.
Hi, Carmel, and like my colleagues, thank you very much for the invitation, especially because having been a member of the Greater Liverpool and Knowsley branch for many years before I switched to working in the West Midlands, it's great to be back in my home, even virtually. Why I'm standing for president, and it's an interesting one, bearing in mind that I'm already on council, is, as we were highlighting, we need a president who will stand up for the profession, will be able to be the voice of nursing, and to be able to work effectively with a whole range of individuals to make the kind of differences we need. Now, some of that is on the key kind of issues that we've got on safe staffing and pay, and that's mission critical for us this year. But it's also in terms of changing the organisation so that it is much more agile, it's much more member-led, and that the branches and the boards have much greater autonomy to deal with the issues in their area. Still be a national college across the UK, but recognise that if we are going to respond to what is a very quick changing set of situations, we need to be able to enable our branches, enable our forums, enable our boards to be much more on the ball and able to do the things that will make a difference for our members at local level. And it's critical to that that the governance reviews that we've had following the two EGMs have to be developed, but it also has to be something which is not something that's done in a corridor or a meeting room away from the members. It has to be co-production. It has to be something which draws in the widest diversity of our members, whether that's in terms of which field of nursing practice, whether it's in terms of whether it's NHS or non-NHS, because with 40% of our members, roughly speaking, outside of the NHS, one of our weaknesses is we haven't engaged those members as effectively as we could. So it's critical for us that any of the changes that we make to make the voice of nursing stronger and for us to be a much more effective organisation has to be done through that co-production model. And it's critical that we engage members in a way that we've learned from the industrial action in Northern Ireland, where you're drawing in members to take on the roles they're comfortable with and not making them feel that they're forced to take on a rep's role as a steward or a safety rep or a learning rep, that we are engaging them in a way to be the communicators for us, the touch points for our members to enable them to take part. And we need to do that this year, particularly because there is a strong likelihood that we must be ballot ready to enable us to respond to whatever the peer review body in England says, and as we're doing in Scotland, to ensure that when that ballot is taken in Scotland, that we get a strong voice for nursing, explaining to the Parliament in Scotland or to any of the other areas of the UK why nursing deserves safe staffing and fair pay. But the other aspect of it is that one of the weaknesses for the college is we've tended to be one track. We've tended to go to the departments of health to try and make changes to the things that are important to nursing. And that's a very limited approach. We haven't engaged with local government. We haven't engaged with the other departments of state to the effect that we should do. And we haven't engaged fully with patient bodies. So it's critical for us to be able to use the 500,000 members or so that we have, but build on that, build on the fact that we have a network of friends, of family, and of organisations nationally and internationally who we can work with to make a significant change to the voice of nursing and the impact that nursing has, not just in a selfish sense for us as members, but to the patients and the public that we care for. And that, for me, is why we need a president who will stand up and push for all of those things and try to ensure that we deliver on all of those things that are key to nursing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody. And I think the president is such, it's our highest office, isn't it? And it's such a position of responsibility and such an undertaking. So thank you very much for all taking part. I'm going to hand you over to Mike with a series of questions. Thank you.
People to ask questions.
Can I ask, of all the questions to go in the chat box?
No, I think we can be fairly informal, really. You throw your hand up if you want to ask a question, Maggie. You crack on.
You got your hand up. Away you go.
Okay. Well, I've been making myself little notes when I was listening to you speaking. So I've got one for each of you. Maria first, long COVID. We are doing something about this now, and I just thought I'd put that in. We are looking at that. Having been present at the EGM, I witnessed behaviour on stage which I would not expect from a president. How then can you assure me that the disinterested behaviour you display towards members at the EGM as Chair of Council will not be replicated as President? And for Denise,
do you want to take them each in turn, because it might be easier then? Mainly because I think, so are you talking about the EGM, the first EGM or the second EGM? Right, the first EGM, I think I was interested. I think what a lot of people don't always realise, one, that auditorium was quite dark, and two, I've got quite a significant hearing impairment. And so I really have to concentrate. And so when I'm leaning forward, I'm trying to see the person who's speaking to me so I can try and get more directional sound on that, because the sound wasn't good in that hall, and I think Rod was there and could vouch for that quite easily. And also, and I know that there was pictures put on Facebook and on Twitter from that, which the individual who did that has also apologised for that now that they actually have spoken to me and know me a bit better, perhaps. So I wasn't disinterested. I was actually trying to hear what people were saying and really take it in. So trust me, I was very interested in that EGM. I was very engaged within that, and I'd put a lot of things on hold to try and participate and ensure that we had an EGM that was fair to the membership and made sure that they were listened to and heard, which was even more important. Thank you.
I'll just unmute myself. Thank you very much for that, Mike.
That's okay.
Sorry, I was on mute there and had taken me off that screen because I'm with my laptop. We're in the office. I've got two different screens, so it's quite easy. Denise, I've read your your CV that you put forward. You don't appear to have been active in the RCN, yet you put yourself forward as president. And from your CV, you don't appear to stay too long in any particular role. So how can you assure me that you would stay for the full term as president at a time when we all nursing staff need stability and support? Have I lost you?
No, you're on mute.
That's me. Sorry, I bound to do this one with you. I believe I have been active in the RCN for many, many years. I think we are active in all kinds of different ways. For many, many years, I've been part of a branch and more, latterly around the forums. And if most people will know me from Congress, I'm normally usually a last-minute substitute for a voting member at Congress around the forums. I think I have stayed in jobs quite a long time. I've been in my current job for 6 years. Before that, I was in a changing organisation. So many of the organisations I was in before dissolved around me, mainly due to the NHS changes. So 5 years as a director of nursing at Worthing. I'm pretty committed. I think anyone that knows me knows that I am. I spent many years as the National Student Advisor as well, very committed to that. And actually, I've been to every Congress since 1988, bar one. So I think there probably wouldn't be many that would doubt my commitment. I just think we're active in very different ways, all of us, and engage in different ways.
Thank you. And for Rod. Rod, you state that you recognise the need for the RCN to be member-led and help engage members in the same ways they did in Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland, Scotland and Wales do not have the population of England, and the variances in local cultures alone in England may mean different approaches. How could that diversity be addressed?
Mixture ways. And Maggie, thanks for the question. That diversity issue is a critical one for us. It's recognising that not every member's circumstances are the same, whether it's through their work, whether it's their family commitment, or indeed the range of other interests that many nurses have. So recognising that first is important. Secondly, recognising that diversity is a strength for us across our organisation, because we touch so many people in our lives through the things that we do at work, but through the things that we do in our local communities. And it's one of the reasons why learning from experience elsewhere, and I'll come back to the Northern Ireland one in a second, but learning from Europe, from the USA, about how you can engage and how you can use things like tonight, the technology, to enable people to engage. But one of the great strengths of what has gone on in Northern Ireland was the recognition about the strength of having people who, in their wards, in their clinics, in their GP surgeries, acting as a connector, using the grassroots model, talking to individuals, is one of the best ways of engaging people in a range of activities, whether it's telling them that the branch meeting is on tonight, or getting them to lobby their MP or their local council. And the organising model that is being brought in will be critical to that, because it will give people the confidence and the skill to be able to engage more effectively. It will give them some of the knowledge to engage with the structures that are operating in their area. And it varies hugely, as you highlighted, across the UK. And indeed, I've worked a lot in local government, and it varies from local authority area to local authority area. So it's critical, firstly, that the RCN is better at communicating with, not communicating to, communicating with our members at every level. It's important that we invest in our members so that they're able to engage with us better. Thanks.
Thank you very much for that, Rod. Now I'll let somebody else ask some questions. I just thought I'd break the ice, so thank you very much.
Thanks, Maggie.
Thanks very much, Maggie. So it's always difficult to kind of throw a question out there first off. Myself and Mike and the rest of the branch have been engaging with MPs across across our region for a while now, and we've been trying to get across the message that we need government to understand the nursing profession and what we do, and obviously talking about our campaign. And one of the things that we've been trying to get across to them is the hardships that some of our colleagues are facing. And certainly in our area, you know, we know of nurses that despite, you know, a full-time job after, you know, they're in their graduate entry-level profession and maybe agency work as well on top of that, that they're still having to use food banks to feed their families and, you know, to make ends meet. What would you as RCN president say to this kind of member who is maybe a little bit further removed from things as those of us who are a bit more engaged are? What would you say to them? So that's to each of you. So we'll start with Maria first. You're on mute again.
I'm on mute because so you can't hear me breathing down the mic. Sorry. It's quite a difficult one because I've come across quite a few members and people in the last year as I work on Trace, and we've actually come across quite a lot of significant hardship and welfare issues from staff who have had to isolate or who sometimes are persuading to isolate. And it is very clear that that can be such a problem financially for them. Difficulty I've had in Buckinghamshire similarly is when I've spoken to our MP, who is not very sympathetic, I have to say. He always asks me to come forward with real people and real stories. And it's really difficult when people are suffering hardship because they don't want to go public, they don't want to be identified as needing support, because sometimes they see that as a failure and sometimes it's just too distressing. But actually we need to support people to come forward to actually give those real stories, because with politicians, I can assure you, a real person, a real story that tells so much more than me as a one individual telling them on behalf of members. You have to speak up for members, but I have seen so much hardship. I've always known about social deprivation across the country generally. I am very politically aware, but I have come across so much in this last year. I find it shocking. And you have to speak up, and you just have to keep speaking up, and you have to say it again, and you have to say it again, and you've just got to keep pushing the story. But it is support. I'd like to be able to support members to come forward and tell their story. One of the biggest impacts that we had for nursing and through the pandemic, and demonstrating the difficulties of just trying to get shopping after you've done a long shift or coming off night duty and finding the shelves bare, was the one that went viral, where that nurse sat in that car and wept. And I know people who are in Northern Ireland at the moment who are struggling to get their shopping at the moment, not only because of the difficulties that they're balancing 2 and 3 jobs, which they are, but also when they go to the shop, there isn't anything there for them. So it is variable across the country, and I just think we have to keep banging that drum. But we need to also show the evidence, even if we can do some anonymised evidence, which actually is giving reality and effect. And part of that is how we did the safe staffing report. So when we did the safe staffing research, what we did was put into that real stories, and that can help a lot. And those were what I've used with my MP and surrounding MPs as well.
Thank you. And to Denise, the same question.
It's not, obviously Maria's answered that very eloquently, but what I would add to what Maria said, I think we had quite a lot of this during my time as student advisor with the students at the time, with massive hardship, people leaving their courses because of the hardship. And it was a very difficult to articulate that, because people say, well, they've got the bursaries, you know, my son hasn't. But they're completely different. And so I think it was about explaining in a really evidence-based way. And I think the additional thing that we could do around the pay discussion is, as Rod said, engage with the patients, because if we don't do something about this, patients will not have any nurses. This is going to directly impact on the safety of patients. Already it is, because we don't have enough nurses, which makes a reliance on temporary staff, and then makes staff, as well as in hardship, even their shifts even harder because they're working in unsafe conditions. So I think what politicians need to think about is what are the consequences of having no nurses, because there are real pockets around the country and within hospitals actually, and even more so in some of the community and mental health services, where there just are not registered nurses there at all. So I think connecting the stories with, this is the reality of what a nurse experiences, together with, and what if the consequences of us not doing something about this. Nobody wants to hear about the scandals that we've heard in the past of some of the trusts that have had, I'm sure some of you are very familiar with the terrible stories about what patients were suffering, call bells not answered, community staff overwhelmed. So I think it's a connecting of the two that we need to do.
Thank you. And to Rod.
Thanks, Carmel. For me, it's a twin track approach, and Denise and Maria have touched on one of the key aspects about it. If you're looking at it strategically and the way we've got to change policy, policy not just on pay and safe staffing, but policy on the way that we look at the entirety of the population to ensure that nobody's starving. For an affluent country like ourselves, that is a tragedy that should not be tolerated. But the other element of the twin track approach is the practical aspect of, we've got to make a difference to those nurses today. We have to make a difference to the fact that if they're using a food bank today, they are in real difficulty. So the part of the twin track approach has to be this element of, how do we mobilize the support that they need? Now, that's not to subsidise them, that's not to undermine them, but it's to recognise that if they can't feed themselves and their families today, their ability to provide care tomorrow or the day after is compromised. And so certainly some of the work I've done during pandemic about trying to ensure that people who were having to self-isolate had access to food meant I was working with the food banks, I was working with the supermarkets to physically go and shop, to go and get that material and get it delivered to those individuals. So there's an aspect about how we use the RCN Foundation, the Cavell Nurses Trust, a mixture of those organisations to provide that immediate support. But as Maria and Denise were highlighting, it's using those practical stories, anonymised more often than not, to emphasise not just to the politicians but to the wider public how compromised our nursing support workers, our students and our registered nurses are. The second element of it is taking those stories in a meaningful way to MPs, to local government, so that we're able to get policy changes. One of the policy changes I've managed to make in my own local authority where I'm working is to ensure that the local policy associated with discretion on who is awarded a grant if they're having to isolate takes into account those individuals we've just been talking about. So small practical steps at local level, as well as what you need to do nationally. I arranged in West Midlands to have a meeting with a couple of the MPs, but also the Shadow Secretary to the Treasury. And we took a number of our nurses to highlight both the trauma of what they've been through, whether it's in critical care or in community care, caring for folk during the pandemic, but also to highlight the practical impact of poor pay and poor staffing. And it is critical for us to use that to great effect to get that twin track approach to work. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to take Richie and then Dean, then Mike and then Maggie.
Okay.
I don't know if people want to add comments into that. I've got a separate question, so I know people put the hand up, so it might be worth going to them first, Carmel.
Okay.
If we've got to follow on for what's just been said, maybe.
Okay, Dean's yours separate. Mike?
Yep. I think it's going to be a pretty tricky question to ask actually, but in the NHS is really a multicultural international workforce. Most probably, it sort of defines what Britain is all about in a way. And what the government has just done is to release the Sewell report, and the findings in the Sewell report just is so colourblind to the needs of our international workforce and to our own citizens of colour, and goes completely against the recommendations of the Mcshane report of 1999. Can I ask the three candidates, what are the thoughts on this report? More importantly, what should the RCN be doing about it?
Carmel, how do you want to do it?
We'll swap it round. We'll let Rod go first this time.
Thanks, Mike. I mean, it's clear that inequalities across our communities are huge, and that we haven't addressed them, and we must do that. And it's interesting. I was doing some contact tracing interviews with a group of nurses who had come over from India last week. And just routine stuff. They were coming over, they're going to be working here, they're doing all of their appropriate examinations to allow them to work here. But it was highlighting for me very much a number of things. Firstly, they were telling me just how difficult situations are in their own country, and nursing shortages that there are there. So effectively we are adding to their vacancies. But also the circumstances that they face meant that it was essential for them to come to this country to work in the UK to help their families back home. So there's an international dimension, as you highlighted, but also we know from the various reports that have been published that our colleagues of different backgrounds struggle for promotion, struggle to get the continuing educational opportunities that should be available to all of us, regardless of race, creed, colour. And so the RCN has to be, given the diversity of our members, has to be advocating for that at all levels, in civil society, in healthcare practice, in social care practice. One of the elements that's highlighting for me, certainly in the sector outside of the NHS, is how reliant social care is on healthcare staff from outside of the UK, but also from our own communities. And they get poor pay, they get poor terms and conditions in many cases, and they don't get the support that they need to flourish in whatever field of practice that they're in. If the RCN doesn't stand up for them, then it's not worthy of being a professional body. Thanks.
Now I'm on mute. Thanks, Rod. And Denise?
So I think the RCN can do a lot more in this area. Certainly, I've done quite a lot of work more recently with Roger Klein, and I've talked about the Being Fair work. I think we see huge inequities within the nursing profession. We've got our stewards, our branches, our regional representatives seeing the inequity across disciplinaries. We see quite a lot that's going on with recruitment, promotion. We've got the res data, but I think the RCN themselves have got a lot of data. And why are we not using that data? We're spending a huge amount of membership money on representation, both of nurses and under regulators as well. And we could be using that money far more proactively and doing something up front. I think there's a whole load of work to be done around kind of bullying, the kind of incivility work that happens in the experiences of all of our nurses. And I think if you look at the work we have done with overseas recruitment, look at how many of those nurses have been promoted or have put them forward to promotion. And we've seen more recently, one of the advocates on Twitter has managed in a very short space of time to get mentors for Filipino nurses. And we should be leading as a Royal College in those kind of opportunities. And I just think there is so much more we can do. What we do to get a kind of real mixture of diversity into senior positions in the Royal College of Nursing, to stand for council, stand for president, and that has got to be a lot more work that we need to do in role modelling. What does good look like? What does good inclusive leadership look like? So I don't think for a moment we can say that we haven't got massive problems, but we have got a real opportunity to do something about it.
Thank you. And Maria?
Well, I'd endorse what my colleagues have said in many ways, and I'm just going to take it on a slightly different tack. I actually think the report itself is disgraceful, and I don't think it should have been welcomed at all. Actually, I thought it was a disgrace. I thought it was incredibly biased. They're not living in my world. And diversity is important. The RCN could do an awful lot more. It could do an awful lot more just to encourage the members that we've got to be able to come forward and speak up. We could do an awful lot more in creating more, like we have in the South East area. We've got the Fusion group, which is trying to bring people from all walks across the nursing team to come together and support each other and speak out, because I did a lot of work some time ago, and particularly on my dissertation about bullying in the NHS, and a lot of that bullying in the NHS was linked to the different diversity and lack of promotion for people, and how people were excluded from opportunities, and how they were, not selected for opportunities or encouraged by people in areas. And that's not changed. And the RCN hasn't changed. If you look at the makeup of council, it's not reflective of the diversity of the membership in many ways. So we clearly are not encouraging enough the members that we've got. We've got, nearly 500,000 members. You cannot tell me that we cannot do more with the resources we've got and with the assets that we do have and the finances that we've got to do more about bringing people along, because we have to support the leaders that are out there. We have to support members to be able to come forward, stand up and take those roles, not because of their colour, but because they are able to do the job. And we just need to support them to be able to articulate that they are as good as anybody, because they are. We are human beings. We're all human. We're all the same. There is no difference. There shouldn't be, but there clearly is. And that's right across the board. And you see it in every organisation in the country. It is rare that you see, some real leaders. We're lucky in Buckinghamshire hospitals because we've got a great chief nurse. We've got great deputy chief nurses that are reflective. I'm one of those men who volunteered through Twitter. So, and I thought it was a great initiative to be able to bring forward and put leaders in touch with experience with others who would like to just have that private mentorship there. We can all do that. But actually, I think the RCN could do an awful lot more. I think it could do a lot more with the resources it's got. It could invest more in that. But that report should have been just thrown out. It is a disgrace, and I have no hesitation in saying that. I think it might have been an attempt, but I actually think it was a complete and utter whitewash, and I don't think that's good enough or acceptable. And I've yet to find colleagues that do.
Thank you. Richard, do you want to put your question forward?
Yeah, thank you. And it's to all the candidates really, and the guys from the branch might guess where this is coming from. But as the education link really is, what are the priorities for you if president, if you're successful, for student nurses? As we know, they've had an impact on their programme like nothing before for the last 12 months, which is probably going to take 2 years to turn around and get any stability back. And that's if the NMC don't change their standards when we leave, because we've left the EU. So really, it's just about what would your top priorities be around engagement with students and how to support them best.
Rod, do you want to go first?
It's been such a difficult time for our students, many of whom volunteered to go and help out during the pandemic, and the feedback that we've had from a lot of them has indicated how poorly they felt they were respected and treated, and that's disgraceful, bearing in mind that they were stepping up to help out. There's a critical aspect for us about both the educational aspects of that and also the financial impact. We were touching on poverty earlier on, and so we have a mixture of things that we need to be able to deal with in terms of supporting our students. One is ensuring that they get the quality of education they need to become registered practitioners and part of the registered workforce, and how we do that to ensure that they don't lose out either financially or educationally is key. You highlighted the NMC, and my view is the NMC have been unhelpful rather than helpful to, and I'm being polite here, in terms of supporting our students, recognising that they are actually part of their future membership. So there's a combination of things that we need to do. One is, how do we influence the educational establishments to help them to help our students? How do we ensure that none of our students suffer financially from the situation that we've got? So we have to campaign hard to ensure that they get any of the funding that they're entitled to, but also we need to ensure that the bursary is increased, because though they brought it back, it's not anywhere near the level of funding that's required. There's also a group of students that we're tending to forget, and those are the ones who didn't get the bursary, either in the old form or the new form, and who have got huge debts. And one of the things I'd like to see is a debt write-off to ensure that those individuals are able to come into the profession without having to work extra hours to pay for the debt that they've accumulated through no fault of their own, and that's critical. And I think lastly for me, in terms of educational opportunity, it's recognising that we need a situation that allows every student to have a review of their personal circumstances, so that a personal development plan is in place for them that allows them to make up for any deficits in their training that there are, but doesn't hamper them from the opportunities of placements or indeed of posts when they get to the stage where they can apply for them. And it's critical we do that across the entirety of the nursing profession and our nursing students. So whether it's people working in learning disabilities or general nursing, but also that we recognise that there are slightly different circumstances across the various parts of the UK, and that's partly why the four-country approach, but also a personal approach for every student nurse has to be taken into account. It's going to be a huge task, but we won't value our nurses if we don't do something as significant as that. Thanks.
Thanks, Rod. And Denise?
So for me, I think the most important thing is to give students a voice. And I think that whoever you elect as president is not going to have the answers for all kinds of areas, and I think that's why we've got opportunities to hear from the students themselves. And if I learnt nothing in all my years of being student advisor, is the students are pretty vocal about what they need and very, very articulate. I'm always amazingly impressed with the student body, and I've watched many years the students and many of the people. I think, you know, it's a lot of the people on council and chair of council was a active ANS member back in the day. I think listening to the students and recognising the four country differences. I was first as a student advisor when the Deering report came out, and there was no mistake about this. The bursary was going to go completely. It was only by the RCN campaigning, working with the students at the time, Christine Hancock and others, that we got a bursary for diploma students, and that inequity continued for some years. So I think what I would do is listen to the student voice, listen to the our educators as well, and be very clear about what we're asking for. I think without a doubt there's a compassionate response and there's response to financial difficulties, but I think students want more than that, and they're our future profession. And I think sometimes we've got to get out of the way and let the students lead the way. And I think give them a voice in much bigger areas than just their own experience, but wider as well. And just another thing that occurred to me, I was looking at some of back in the day of about 1988, when Project 2000 was first announced, was my first Congress. And I was really interested about how important it is we learn from history and how often we make the same mistakes because we don't look at what we've learned from history. And there's a very interesting report in the Trevor Clay days, those of you who are old enough to remember Trevor Clay as General Secretary before Christine Hancock, and a very interesting document, which was a paper written about the 1988 nurses' strike, and it's called More in Sorrow Than in Anger, about the voices of nurses. And I think if you track what happened then and you track what's happened to students and where we are now, we absolutely have to take some action, because, as I said earlier, we won't have a nursing profession to look after our patients, and that is by far the most important thing we need to do.
Thanks, Denise. Maria?
Well, I think I'd like to replicate the student ambassadors and the student committee up and down the country and have one as strong as that for nursing students in every single university up and down the country, because the ones we've got at the moment are pretty cracking. And we've had some real leaders there that do show the way and are showing the way, and you can see them as the future leaders, and they will be, you know, real role models and ambassadors. My concern is, and it would be no surprise to many people, is I actually don't believe in paid education at all. I don't think that student nurses should have to pay for their course at all. I think education should be free for everybody at any time, and it's a long-held belief that I've had, and I still hold true to it today. Because I don't think that it is fair that anybody comes out of education having a huge debt. I think it is completely wrong, and I think particularly when they go into public service, which what nursing is, whether you're in the independent sector, the community, whether you're in acute, it is public service, and you should not have to pay back such a huge debt at all. So that's where I come from to start with. However, what really does concern me is those students that we've got is the huge attrition rate we still have, and we don't seem to have cracked that one. And part of that is financial support that they need throughout, but it's also the pressures, and it's the pressures of studying and working. And I don't want to go back to those days, you know, where we were on the wards and we were left in charge of the wards for all sorts of scary times. I don't want to turn the clock back. I want to turn the clock forward, where our students can, you know, actually enjoy their education, can participate fully. My concern is that we need to look after the ones we've got at the moment, and those that have worked so hard through the pandemic. And the attraction that nursing may now have is great, that we may have more applicants to it. It doesn't mean to say that they're all suitable for nursing, and we still mustn't lower the standards, you know, just because of the numbers, which is a real issue that we could encounter if we're not careful. But it's the support. How much support can we put into supporting those students to complete their education, to enable them to do that? I think we do a fair bit about the step off, you know, step on, step off escalator through it. But actually, it really will boil down to money, ability to manage home and work, family. The politicians seem to see nursing as, you know, the 18-year-old straight from school going into nursing. And that's not where we are. And also look at the loss that we suffered with the bursary being taken away for the mature people that came into nursing. What a lifeline they've been, and what, you know, what a contribution they have made, because that life experience tells. So we haven't got it right. I don't think that any president, as Denise and Rod has said, it's a hard task. I think it is about, we have got to empower those that we have, and the students we've got, and the educationalists that we've got, to speak up and speak out and support them, and make sure that we're standing there alongside them. But yeah, I would really like to have our student ambassadors have a committee in every single university up and down the country, because you look at the students today, and you look at the ones that have gone before, and yeah, Mr. Dawes was one for sure, and I think even Mike Travis was once, and you've got Jess Sainsbury, you've got Charlotte, you Georgina, all of these people that are all contributed so much. And I wouldn't dismiss either the nursing associates or the apprentices, because they are different ways of coming in, and sometimes that might be the only avenue into nursing. I was a cadet nurse, and I would never have been able to go into nursing if I hadn't been able to come into that route. I would never have been able to do it at all. So we mustn't forget those other areas, those other groups that come in and support nursing, because it is a family. We've got to look after each other and bring each other along the way.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can I just make a comment? Unfortunately, Maria, I was never ever on the student committee, because I was never a student. I was a pupil nurse and an enrolled nurse.
Oh,
and I come from the
I
days
was an
of real,
enrolled nurse.
Yeah, I come from the days of real discrimination against enrolled nurses, even by college.
Yeah.
I was going to say that my student debt is so high that I've just given up the thought of ever paying it off now, and I just can't worry about it because I'd never get out of bed. That's where we are. Dean, next question to you, and then I'll bring Maggie in.
Cheers, thanks, Carmel. My question is kind of like reflecting on my own career in mental health nursing. I've always felt kind of lucky and protected in the sense that amidst all the trauma that I observe, I always get so much supervision, I get so much debrief, I get so much protection over everything I observe. And I think over the last year, witnessing friends in A&E and on wards and in nursing homes, where they just don't have this luxury, where they are around trauma constantly and they don't have any sort of way of providing this debrief that's so important for their own well-being. So as sort of like, presidential candidate, what sort of are your views in terms of where we go after this? What can we do to protect the well-being of our workforce when there's so much trauma that they're observing?
Dean, and that's certainly something that we've been talking about as a branch is the fear that we're going to have a whole cohort of our colleagues who are going to be living with PTSD. So how do we look at that? Denise?
I completely agree with you. I think we have to do more, without a doubt. And I think we've always needed to do more, but I think the pandemic's made it to the forefront kind of more dramatically. And actually, in my experience, certainly in my current role, I think that mental health services and the way they operate have got so much to teach the acute service. I think there's so many things that are so much better. And I think what we really need to do is think about what that might look like. What practically could we do? There are lots of attempts at that. I think debriefs or supervision and different models. And I think where there is really good practice, that's where the RCN, bearing in mind the reach they've got, have got an opportunity to shine a light on. I think we're very good at focusing on where we're not getting right, but actually highlighting what good looks like, because retaining nurses and valuing them is one of the most important things we've got to do at the moment. So without a doubt, I 100% believe we need to get behind and do something. But the solution, I think, would be about finding where the best practice is and how that can be replicated.
Thank you. And Maria? Have we lost Maria? Rod, do you want to come in? Rod, you're on mute.
Thanks for that. I trained originally as a psychiatric nurse, so for me, mental well-being is kind of critical to it. And though I've specialised over the years in things like child protection or public health, that recognition that we see things that other people don't, that it has a trauma on us because we see people at the point of despair, we see them at all sorts of difficult times in their life, and that has a cumulative effect on us, as well as, if it's a particularly bad trauma, something which will have an immediate effect on us. So as Denise was highlighting, we need to recognise that though it's part of the job and it can't be taken away from us, there has to be appropriate support networks in there to allow folk to have the debrief that they need, to let them talk through any of the things that are giving them cause for concern. And there has to be, as you were highlighting in good practice in mental health, of having that supervision time to work through it. But it's also, when I look at other professions, and one of the advantages of working as a public health clinician is that I'm on I'm working at the same standard as my medical colleagues, and yet their contracts allow them time for reflection, time for CPD, time to do a range of things, such as have the support that they need. And we need to build into all of the terms and conditions for our staff the recognition that that's vital for everybody. And it doesn't matter whether they're working in accident and emergency, critical care, learning disabilities, maternity services. We can go through the whole list. It has to apply to everybody, because the nature of what nursing does means that we are seeing people in crisis situations or critical situations, and that has a daily and a cumulative effect on us. So in the negotiations that we have to have across the board, and that would include for our students, as we were touching on earlier on, there has to be a radically different approach that allows the investment in our terms and conditions to enable people to have that time to reflect, time to develop, time to decompress, as some people would use, and recognizing that for some that will mean that they need access to additional support services, because the level of trauma that they've suffered means that they do have to be able to step away and step out and get the dedicated mental health support that they need. Otherwise, we lose a very valuable member of our profession. And I've seen too many colleagues over time who've just said, that's it, I can't cope, I've had enough, I'm going to do something that's less stressful. And that is a tragedy for them. It's a tragedy for the profession, because we lose somebody who has invested so much in over the years in the profession, and will no longer be able to provide the care that we want. That's wasteful. We should be learning from things like the military, albeit that they have lessons to learn as well. But as Denise was highlighting, get the best practice in place, get it across the entirety of health and social care, particularly now given the year that the year plus that so many of us have gone through. Thanks.
Thanks, Rosa Maria.
Yeah, sorry, I had to go and answer the door. Life took over. I think it is really an important bit. I'm really lucky in that I've got friends that also work in mental health, and they've always been good and helped support me when I've sort of needed. But also the team I actually have now is of all mixed professions, and within the area that I'm working at the moment, which is in Trace, which I know everybody loves, we've actually introduced in our section now, we're getting a wellbeing officer. We have got a committee to pulling together to pull resources together. We have got to share out with all staff, including those in our teams. We do a debrief. We do a debrief for the caseworkers. We do a debrief with team leaders. We do a debrief among the clinical leads, which we introduced quite early on. And that was, I have to say, and it was at the suggestion of one of my team who is a mental health nurse, but it was also a physio who has a particular interest in well-being and support. And we tried to put that in very early on. We do it particularly for when we've been dealing with safeguarding and welfare cases, which can be quite traumatic to deal with, because you're dealing with people just over the phone, which is more difficult, and it's more difficult to let go sometimes. But also in my local trust, they have a wellbeing hub, and they have also introduced those sort of huddles throughout the day for staff that anybody can go and use, and there's quiet space and there's someone to talk to. So as colleagues have said, it is about pulling together best practice, and it is about advocating that up and down the country for every area, and that needs to be not just only in the acute sector, though. We really do need to look at a community which, you know, people who work in the community are working far more autonomously a lot of the time. They need some more support to disengage and to move on. And also students, very much so, particularly if they're on placement and they see something that is a bit traumatic. And also every member of the team should be able to help do that debrief and be there for their colleagues. But they need the tools sometimes to do that. There are some good learning tools out there, but we could provide more. And if we pulled that together and had that good practice guidelines and, you know, within the RCN and modules that we could pull on and develop to share out and disseminate, that would be good. And we should work with other colleagues. We shouldn't actually just keep it as nursing. We should reach out to the other Royal Colleges and other areas that have also got good practice, because that way you're sort of sharing everything, and you're also spreading the message, because you're actually then having champions in every area that can pull together with colleagues within an organisation as well from each group, so it's not just one. So sometimes we mustn't look just within our own boundaries. We need to get outside the box and reach out and link with others. So sometimes we can be a bit too internally focused and not externally focused, and not just nursing.
Thank you. Maggie, you've put a question in the box. Do you want me to read that out, or are you happy to ask?
No, I've got another one.
Oh, okay.
Okay. The focus very much on the registered nurse and student nurses. What would each of you do if elected president to help our nursing associate members be recognised in their own right for their own skills and level of responsibility, especially that they've undertaken when addressing the registered nurse shortages and during COVID?
Thank you, Maggie. Denise, do you want to answer that first?
Thank you. I think that's a really important question, actually, because one of the opportunities I think we have within the RCN is to support and put some safeguards in. I think that there is a real risk, and I think we alluded to it earlier about what's currently going on with the crisis in our vacancy rates, recruitment, retention, and the risk, I think, of shortcutting and delegating quite a lot of nursing care to associates without giving them the safeguards, the support, the education, they need. And again, I think the health assistants have representation within the RCN. I think that could be better. It's a very, very large workforce, not just in nursing acute care, but community social care as well. I think there's a huge opportunity here to do something that is tangible. And again, I don't think I could sit as you know, a president and say I've got the answers to all of these questions, because I think we have to go to the people who really know and breathe and live the experiences about what it is that they need. And I think the role of a president is to represent. My personal belief is the role of the leader is to make the opportunities for everyone to be successful and lead, and that's every part of the organisation. I'm a very non-hierarchical person. I don't think everyone's valuable, but I think what we need to do is hear the voices of the people in those positions and hear from them in the same way that we need to hear from the students about what it is that they need most to support and safeguard, develop and value that part of our workforce.
Lovely, thank you. And Rod?
Thanks, Carmel. We've got an interesting situation across the country in that we've got nursing associates in some parts of the UK, but not in others. And as Denise is highlighting, they are a valuable section of the workforce, but they are at risk in a number of ways. One is that mission creep. And we've seen when there are nursing shortages, and we saw it in the days of enrolled nurses as well, as Mike, I'm sure, will testify, where people were put into position because of nursing shortages into positions that they weren't prepared for, and that they weren't given the support that they needed to carry out those roles. So there's an element for us about looking very critically at why a decision was made to create nursing associates, how that links with the, if you like, the skills escalator across all of the aspects of the nursing workforce, how we ensure that people who want to be in that role and are comfortable in that role are not exploited, but also that they've got the opportunity to develop. Denise quite rightly said that part of this is how we engage with them, how we learn from the experiences that they've had, how we enable them to tell us what they would find as useful, but also recognise that they are in a potentially difficult position, so that some of the things that we'll have to do is, once we've listened, is speak up and speak up loudly to ensure that both the NMC and employers value the contribution that they make, protect them from exploitation, but enable us to give them the personal development plans, the continuing professional development that they need appropriate to the roles that they're in, and recognise that we don't want to fall back into the situation where we've got an exploited workforce. One of the elements that we've seen in the pandemic is decisions being made by NHS trusts in England and boards elsewhere in the UK, looking to have more responsibility placed on both the registered workforce as well as the non-registered workforce, because of the pressures that we're seeing in different units. Part of our voice as the RCN is to stop that exploitation, but also to give those members the opportunity to flourish, and as long as they're around, ensure that they are valued members of the team.
Lovely, thanks, Rod. And Maria?
There's different models in different parts of the country, as Rod has said. So Wales has a very different view. Northern Ireland has another view. Scotland has a different view to England. So and people are used in very different ways and given different responsibilities and recognised in different ways throughout that, as we all know. But I am a strong advocate for, you know, this workforce, because and certainly have been a big advocate for the nursing support worker committee from the start, and for giving those members equal voice. We certainly need to develop a much better offering for that group across the board, because what I don't want to see is, I don't want to see that group being targeted by the RCN just to get them as members and take the money and not give them anything in return. And I need to see something in return. And we have some resources currently at the RCN for that group, but nothing like as much as we've got for the registered workforce. So I would like to see that strengthened, to show that we value that group, so that we are the role models that show other employers how they perhaps should be looking at that workforce, because there is a big danger of exclusion, massively, because it is about role substitution as well in some ways. To be able to do something, we have to treat them as equals in many ways. And that, as I said, part of that is about our offering being there. Part of that is all our support services being there and the same level and support, but definitely the development element of it, because again, similarly to my nursing students, advocates and the ambassadors, we need the same for this. But at the moment, I think we've just got to be really wary of what the future is hold and the current thinking by governments at how they're going to use this workforce, given the nursing shortages that we have for the registered workforce. And registered is wrong because the nursing associates are actually registered. They're also paying for the privilege as well. So we need to look at our terminology, which is something that I have fought long and hard for, about, you know, what is the right terminology we should use? How can we be more inclusive? And we're not. And it's a bit like the governance models we have in place currently at the RCN for the number of council members and the number of, you know, how committees are, you know, can interact with council and actually be part of council. There is something still to be done. I hope that I am a role model and a supporter and show that and would speak up for that quite happily, and for this group particularly. But that needs to go right across the board, across the whole of the RCN, so we stop thinking of nursing as the elite group as well, which does come across sometimes. I think we could do more. I think we could do more in the forums. I think we could do more about celebrating the day. You know, we've now got the nursing support group and day, which is good. We need more at Congress. We need more in the way of the education that we provide and how we support that and promote it and speak up for them, because I don't think we do anything like enough at the moment. I think it's an amazing workforce, and you know, I've worked in many different fields in many different areas, and we've used you know, HCAs and support workers in many different ways, but also I championed them being seconded onto other education as well, and to go on to nursing if they wanted, and paid for that privilege as well as a manager, so that we've done it within our own department budgets to enable that to happen. And that doesn't happen anything like as much now. When you in any organisation, I don't see those secondment opportunities and that support for that group to go on to develop their own CPD. So the personal development plans actually do become really important to support that. So again, we've really got to take the employers to task as well, but we've also got to keep it very where we are in the government at the moment as to how they are looking to use this group. And also we need to keep an eye on the NMC as how we go forward, because we really rolled over as well when this came along. We were caught on the back foot as well, I think. So we haven't got anything like enough strongholds in there for influencers yet.
Thank you. I think time will tell with the nursing associate role, really, and how that kind of role pans out. And you know, I hope that it doesn't end up in the next kind of enrolled nurse argument, because all of our members of staff are valid and part of the team, and that's what we need. I'm going to bring Mike in, and then I've got a written question from Maggie, and then from Richie, and then we'll wrap things up if that's all right. Mike? Mike, take yourself off me, please, love.
Yeah. You know, just leave me alone. I'll be there. Hiya. I've got another pretty big question for you, which I think is quite technical, regards nursing and not just nurses. But we've now had 21 years of Agenda for Change, and we're currently in a big debate and a political and industrial debate around the value of the Agenda for Change pay structure. But why haven't we got the same zing for the value of nurses and nursing within rebanding within that structure? Because none of these posts have been for 20 years. That's it.
Sorry, there you go. There's a mute there. Rod, do you want to answer that first, and then we'll go to Maria and Denise?
Yeah, thanks. And apologies to Maggie Heaton, because I'm going to name check her, because Maggie did some brilliant work where she took a look at the pay grades across her trust and looked at the comparisons between the physios, the occupational therapists, and other health professionals within our organisation, and compared that both in terms of the numbers and the percentages of people who moved across the banding. And what she identified was quite clearly that nursing didn't get the recognition that it deserved, that our contribution to the overall organisation was not recognised, that we had far too many people on a band 5 and not progressing to band 6. And if we look at the comparison with our midwifery colleagues, there is a great move for many of our midwifery colleagues after a year to recognise the fact that they've progressed. And it is something which we as a college haven't got to grips with, and we should have got to grips with, to ensure that every nurse is valued for the work that they do, and not just the registered nursing workforce, because it applies right across the nursing family. Because we've seen our support worker colleagues extending their roles, but still not being recognised for the quality of care and the expertise that they provide. And that applies not just at the lower bands, but it also applies up at the upper bands. We're seeing our more experienced nurses taking on additional responsibility, but the way the grading system and the banding system works doesn't just recognise it. And that has to be one of the easy wins potentially for us to improve nursing terms and conditions across the entirety of the nursing family, and to do that in a way within the NHS that provides the benchmark for those of our staff who are working in the non-NHS sector, whether it's in the charitable sector, whether it's in some of the private sector organisations. But critically, we can do that, and we've got people like Mike who've pushed on this, Mike and Maggie who've pushed on this issue, and have got the knowledge and expertise to argue the case effectively for our members. And if we use that knowledge and expertise to best effect, we could make a significant difference to the terms and conditions of our members across the UK.
Thanks, Rod and Maria.
Yeah, I agree with you, Rod, on all of that, really, because there is something about using that voice of experience and knowledge, being the spokespeople as well for the RCN, far more than using staff and even council members at that. But it is quite a significant thing, and I agree with Mike. You know, for me, any qualified nurse after a year should be able to move automatically to a 6. You do it in midwifery, you can do it in nursing. It boils down to money. We know why it happens. It boils down to money because nursing is a bigger workforce. But I with Mike and Maggie and everybody else, worked on Agenda for Change and did that transition period and as a lead for that in my area. And Agenda for Change was good for its time. It was good for its time, but it needs a complete revisit. All those JDs need a complete revisit. If you look at the JDs for healthcare workers, for instance, in Scotland, it is completely different, really, to how they're used in this here. And people go up automatically as a healthcare assistant. You would work as a 4, band 4 more often than not a band 3. So there's all of those groups need to be looked at, and the roles have changed. The roles have changed dramatically now, and yet everybody's held back. And I know, you know, it was part of the, you know, the grand hope that with the 3-year deal that we would look at Agenda for Change and look at this, but we haven't. And it's actually, this could be, you know, a real opportunity in the safe staffing and in the pay review this year, is to actually really push on this to get a full review and that the pay reflects the roles, because it doesn't. It really doesn't. I have yet to find an average band 5 nurse, because none of them are average. They all develop. And if you give me a band 5 nurse who's been there for 20 years, I would say, what on earth is going on? You are just ignoring that 20 years of experience and not rewarding it for that. Yes, higher up the grade, you know, they do more and more jobs, and they're expected to work longer hours and 24/7, which is not acceptable either. But I think we've got to look at this particular group. We've got to really look at the falls on, well, actually, I wouldn't even limit it. I just think you need to tip the baby out of the bathwater, really, and start afresh. And you need to really do look at them, because you look at an HCA who's doing work at 2, and they're probably working and functioning and being expected to deliver work that we would normally have classed as a band 4 nursing associate. There's very little difference. There is in the educational path, but not in the experience when they've had all that experience. So it is time to move on agenda for change, but it is tied to money. It is absolutely tied to money. But the original thought process was that people would be able to move up through the bands when we implemented agenda for change, and we haven't really held anybody and any government or the pay review body or anybody else to account for that change. So, you know, certainly the work that Maggie's done emphasises it, and it's more work like that we need, but we need to really push the messages out. And again, I don't think that's that. I think that has to come from the ground floor. It has to come from those who are doing those jobs to do that pay comparison, because it's time we actually had an equal pay claim, because that's what it's worth. And we could do it.
Thanks, Maria. And Denise?
Come off mute. Sorry, I'm trying to come off mute. The only thing I would add is I mentioned earlier about learning from history, and I think agenda for change came in as a proposed solution, and it's been really interesting if you track it over the years, because what actually is the issue here is, I think it's about equity in the way it's being applied. And so what you find is exactly as Maria has stated, is it's more around what are the vacancies and therefore how do you fit the role to the vacancies rather than fit the role to the competencies. There's also, I think there are variations in the way that these bands are graded. So there's people, you know, certainly a shortage of people to do the banding, and certainly differences and variation between, I think, more between admin staff as well and nursing staff. So the question, I suppose, is what's the solution? Because if it's not working, should we start again? Or what would be the right solution here? Because what we're trying to do is deal with a workforce issue, a retention issue, and an equity and fairness issue. So I don't profess to know what the solutions are, but I do think it's worth an engagement and a discussion around what they might be.
Thanks, Denise. And I think we've been talking about this as we've been talking to our MPs and engaging people across the land about this, discussing the Fair Pay campaign and discussing what nurses actually do. And I've kind of said a million times, you know, our roles have massively changed. And from when I was a wee child, gasping for breath in A&E in Alder Hey, you know, I would wait for the doctor to come and cannulate me then. And now there are nurses putting long lines in on the wards. So our roles have massively changed, and, you know, the kind of maxi nurse, mini doctor kind of scenario. And in my own city, here, if you stay in one hospital, you know, a nurse, a healthcare assistant, a band 2, could stay on the bus for another half an hour and go to another hospital and do the same job for a band 3. So it's very differently applied across the land, and it's very difficult. And I think if there was a way of us all kind of banded together, that we could reband every single band 5 in the country to a band 6, and I'm sure all NHS bosses across the land want to beat me over to stick with that. But the reality is that our job has changed massively, and AFC works, but it's not applied to us, because I don't know whether there's a fear there or a massive monetary issue with that, but people just don't want to pay nurses, and maybe we don't stand up for ourselves enough, and we've kind of let that lie for so long. But certainly every band 5 nurse, and I know, should be further up the band than they are, so it's difficult. Richie, do you want to read your add-on question from here, and then Maggie add yours, and then I was going to add something to your original question, if that makes sense.
Can I just put in a wee comment there about agenda for change? I think all nursing staff at all levels they need their job descriptions reviewing, and for nurse managers to accept that the role has changed dramatically and have them put for rebanding.
Yeah.
And if they meet that criteria, they should be paid, remunerated appropriately for the role that they're doing, which isn't happening at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, and all across the land, I should say all across the bands, and it's difficult. It's a massive piece of work, but I think it's definitely something we need to look at. Richie.
Yeah, mine's really just a follow on from the student question I asked before. What would the kind of RCN, or what would you lead on as president in regards to the kind of increase in demand of, we've got more students coming into the education wanting to be nurses, but actually there's not enough kind of services or placement opportunities for them to complete their programs. So again, it's just about the kind of support for students completing programs, and what would you do around kind of placement capacity or the quality of practice learning, because you've got staff in practice who are snowed under and under so much pressure as well, and they've got this role, because it is part of the code, about being practice supervisors and practice assessors. What could the RCN do more about in regards to that, supporting the practice staff, but also the student placement opportunities?
Thanks, Richie. And you've all somehow managed to wiggle yourselves in different positions around my screen, and I genuinely don't know how you've done that. So I'm going to go with Denise, and then Rod, and then Maria.
So, interesting question, and not a new one, I'm afraid. I think, back in many years ago when I was working at George's, I think that was our top concern about how on earth, and usually it's boom and bust, isn't it, with student recruitment. So, we push it right down. We don't have enough students, then we go out and we recruit, and then we can't get the placements, can't get the supervision. So it's not a new problem, but I do think it needs some new solutions. And I spoke earlier about nurses being everywhere, and I just think the more you think about where nurses are, I think we could be far more creative. We've got all those professional forums in the RCN. Let's kind of get creative and say, well, what are some really great opportunities for the nurses? And I think more recently, I've got a lot of involvement in, on the other side, I've had families experiencing nursing care in all kinds of settings. And I just think that if we're more creative in the way we do it, but what we mustn't do is give inadequate and irrelevant placements, because I think there was a risk of that, certainly back in sort of the 90s, of things that students themselves couldn't understand why they're in certain places. And there's no point in putting students anywhere where they're not going to get the supervision and they're not going to learn. I think the students are some of those solutions. I think the feedback from students' experiences about what's good, what isn't good, looking much wider and talking to the universities as well around best practice. I think we're very good at focusing on where things aren't working and not so good at finding where people have found solutions. So this is a UK issue, and there will be solutions out there. And if we put our heads together, I think we could come up with some really good areas of good practice that people could on each place trying to reinvent how on earth they're going to.
Thanks, Denise. And Rod,
Thanks, Carmel. Richie, really good question, and as Denise was highlighting, an incredibly complex one. I think one of the elements for us is in terms of recognising that there are actually potentially, and I'll stress the potential, and I'll explain why in a second, potentially far greater variety of opportunities for nurses to get exposed to different aspects of health and social care. We have some examples of brilliant practice across the country, but generally speaking, we've tended to funnel our students into almost traditional slots. One of the reasons for me saying that is that, as well as being on the Nursing and Midwifery Council register, I'm also on the UK Public Health Specialist register, and I'm also a registered assessor for trainee public health consultants. So the registrars have me as an educational supervisor. I'm responsible for looking at different aspects of their training, so that they can have, and that's both doctors, dentists, nurses, anybody who's coming through the 5-year training programme to be a consultant in public health. And I look at some of the opportunities that those colleagues get, and I look at some of the opportunities that are out there for nursing staff, and we don't give individuals the opportunity to get the access to the wider aspect of health and social care that we could. We're beginning to see opportunities appearing in places like prisons. We're beginning to see them in the charitable sector, where if you think in substance misuse as an example, many of the substance misuse services are actually being run by not-for-profit organisations. And we haven't invested in those organisations to ensure that the quality of the educational supervision, the quality of the experience that they get, would actually be beneficial to those staff. And that's madness, because it doesn't give those staff the opportunity to see the diversity of nursing practice, to learn about patient groups or communities that they may have to experience in whatever field of practice they eventually decide to specialise in. And consequently, we waste the opportunities that are there for them and for the patients in the future. So critically, I think that there has to be a radical look at how we create a broader band of opportunities, but have that properly supported to enable the quality of the supervision, the quality of the experience, and the benefits for the individuals who will be doing that supervision to be there as well, because you are taking on a significant additional responsibility to your day job. For me, as a consultant in public health, director of public health, that's recognised in my job plan. It's not recognised in the job plan of many of the people that we expect to carry out that support, that educational support and mentorship. And that's a weakness, because we undermine the quality of support that our students get, and we undermine the quality of the educational experience. So I'd look to try and tackle it through those different opportunities, and I'd look to build good examples of that in different areas of practice, so we can show to that broader band of organisations what a difference it could make to them, as well as a difference it would make to the students. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Richard. Just put an added comment in the chat. Should the RCN then lobby hard with the NMC as their standards restrict some of these wider opportunities? That sounds like a Congress agenda item to me, Richard. Take that from the floor. Maria.
Certainly does to me. I'd get that on the Congress agenda straight away, because it is. I mean, Rod's right, and Denise is right. We actually don't reflect the diversity of nursing in the placements that are there, and part of it is about actually how those placements would be managed, and whether we can have on-site direct supervision, clinical supervision of people, or whether you could do virtual by doing something a little bit different, perhaps like working differently in the community and working with other colleagues. Because really, if you look at the whole of healthcare, so you look at domiciliary care as well as, that which is part of health and social care, you look at care homes, you look at the private sector even, which I know Mike Travis will just fall off his chair at that one, but they actually could do a bit of payback, seeing as they steal all the staff and don't pay for any of the training. So you could get a bit of payback in those sort of placements. I mean, I did advocate having a placement at the RCN for a student as well, to learn a little bit more about how unions work and how you work with the forums and all those different aspects. You could have a partial payment with the agenda committee for a week at Congress, which would show you a much broader thing. So we don't look at those sort of things. We think of those as they could be the elective placement, but actually you need something a little bit broader than that. Yes, the NMC would have to agree and change their standards. Yes, we would have to move a bit faster on how we do that supervision and support and debriefing, because that's important. But we don't actually advocate, and we haven't been advocating at the RCN, really placements that reflect today, because today is different. to 10 years ago and 20 years ago, and there is so much focus that is on the acute sector. I get really weary and despondent when I see students who are coming up to their finals and final year and sort of saying, do you think I could go straight into the community, because I really like the community and I'd like to go straight into there as a newly qualified nurse rather than go in the acute sector? And so many people say no. Why? It's a much broader experience in many ways. You'll consolidate an awful lot quite quickly. So we need to be creative, and if we don't role model that in advocating for that, it ain't going to happen, and it will be the same old. And I'm really sorry, but in the last 12-15 months the world has changed, and when you really want to do something, it can be done. That's why I think we can do so much more on some of the other things. We have to push it following. We should be setting that agenda. It's time we actually stepped up to the mark. There you go.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks very much. So Maggie's put a question in the chat, and Maggie, I'm just gonna be dead cheeky and I'm gonna adapt it. We're talking about international nurses that we're bringing into the country to help us with our nursing shortages. So there's lots of different issues that are looking at that, and I really want to know what you would be doing as RCN presidents to help those kind of issues. So we have an issue of kind of asset stripping. That's what we're doing. We're removing registered nurses from their own communities and bringing them into ours to help us, and we're eternally grateful for that. But it leaves an issue of, you know, who is left behind, and those people now who are, you know, in dire need. And then as well with our kind of pay capping and with the Brexit issues that have kind of brought forward, we have then a series of nurses that we take through a set of standards and OSCEs and exams and whatever else, and training that we invest in those people. We get them to NMC standards and registered, and then they never earn the wage that they can where they can stay. So they stay for 5 years and then they move on, and of course they've got an NMC registration then, which is fantastic, and the rest of the world wants that. So they're a group of kind of fairly mobile people, and that we've removed from their own communities, used to our own aid for 5 years, and then we have to start again. And as we heard at the virtual rally the other day, some of these people are left in really, really difficult conditions. They can't apply for any social housing, so they're left in overcrowded houses, you know, amongst multiple kind of occupancy international nurses, living in poverty and squalor, when we've asked them to come here and help. So what can we do, and what can the RCN do for those nurses? So I'm going to start with Rod, please.
Thanks, Carmel. As I mentioned earlier on, it's a very current issue for me. Having interviewed 16 nurses who've just arrived from India as part of our local arrangements on contact tracing and ensuring that different aspects of quarantine apply. And chatting to them about their circumstances and the fact that they felt it necessary to come to the UK. And incredibly well qualified nurses, so real assets to us. But we're stripping that country, particularly at the time now with the levels of COVID in India. So we're not doing something ethically. We're not recognising those staff for the amazing contribution that they're going to make. And we're actually doing it in a way that is costing our community a significant amount of money, which potentially could be better spent. Now, be clear, this is a great group, and the nurses that I've worked with from across the globe in the UK make a fantastic contribution to our country. So it's not about that. It is about the ethical investment in our own workforce and the ethical importation of nursing staff from around the world. We shouldn't be denuding countries that are in dire straits. We should be working cooperatively to enable exchange of nursing staff so that we can learn from other countries. They can learn from us. That shared experience will make a huge difference to the quality of care that collectively we provide within our different countries. But to bring them over and then exploit them is unethical, to say the least. We have a duty of care to them. We should be ensuring that they are able to live and work properly. If only from the selfish point of view, is if we don't look after them properly, if we keep them on poverty wages, we don't give them decent accommodation, how can we reasonably expect them to work to a high standard? And how can we expect any nurse, if we go back to the poverty issue we highlighted earlier on, how can we expect any member of the nursing team to work at their best if they're juggling debt, if they're juggling a whole range of financial and social pressures because we haven't helped them to be in the right level of pay, terms and conditions, and recognised by their employers as providing a valuable contribution. So there's a combination of things that we would need to do with other international organisations to make sure that collectively nurses across the globe aren't exploited, that we've got an opportunity as one of the largest nursing organisations in the world to be able to use that voice to try and ensure that we are not exploiting anybody, but we are creating an environment where we can share the learning, share the knowledge, share the experience, but value those individuals when they're here. Otherwise, we do no service to them and we do no service to the patients that they're meant to care for. Thanks.
Thanks, Rod. And Maria?
Well, sometimes it makes me wonder what kind of civilized society we live in, really. And I say that particularly with the massive cuts to international aid budgets that is going on at the moment. But something that's just not thrown me, but just thrown a thought, which I think is quite interesting, and that is about an exchange mechanism. Whereas we do have an exchange mechanism for bringing international nurses over, and particularly perhaps from some of those countries that are in dire need, because then we can send us expertise over while we teach people expertise here. And I tried to set up an exchange program for nurses from Egypt with my local trust, but I can tell you it was a real challenge to get any leverage at all to be able to get that off the ground. And that was where we would have had an exchange program for specific nurses to come over from Egypt, work for 6 months actually over here in a way, and vice versa. So I just think an exchange program is quite an interesting one to do anyway. But people should be properly rewarded for a proper day's work. And we need to be able to give an outlet for those people. So that to be able to be a voice, we need to be able to connect with those nurses. And they're not necessarily automatically going to join the RCN, because part of it will be a funding issue for them, of the cost of joining the RCN when they've had to pay all that money for visas, fees, NMC, all of that, accommodation, trying to get their own space if accommodation is not provided. So there are things that could be done, and that is if an organisation is bringing over nurses from another countries, that they have to demonstrate that they are doing recruiting in an ethical way, that they are providing accommodation to start with, and that they are going to support them and provide supervision, mentorship, and a real support mechanism for them, and a forum for them to be able to speak out and speak together, and really strengthening the international sort of forum for nurses within the RCN would be one way of doing that, to encourage engagement. And we could do that at different levels, because the biggest group of these people are actually going into the care home sector. They're going into a different sector. They're not necessarily in the acute trusts. Some of the acute trusts are ethical, they are careful. Certainly, they could do more perhaps, but I think there is something that is beholden on the government, really, and immigration rules and checks that need to be done on the employer and potential employer, perhaps even more than the employee, which is where all the focus is and where all the costs land as well. Because a lot of the time, these nurses will have had to pay for their application. They'll have had to pay up front for an awful lot. They have to show a level of income, all of which is taken away from where they are. And then, you know, when we get them here, we sometimes do not support them financially. They may do 2 jobs, sometimes 3. You know, we know those cases where people have done 2 or 3 jobs and they're working end to end for 7 days a week in and week out. That makes a very dangerous practice for them, for the patient, and being unable to, you know, really do the job properly, because they need to send money home, because they've still got to pay back that money that they've had to borrow, perhaps, to get them over here in the first place. But we are very good at taking from other countries. We're not very good at giving back. And we do need an international voice, and we need to strengthen our international voice, because I don't think we have a very strong international voice at the moment. I think we do through the European Federation, Nursing Federation, we have a voice there, but we may lose that because we've left the EU. We may not be able to keep the influence that we have there at the moment as we go forward. So we really do need to make sure that our voice is heard as that biggest union in the world, nursing union in the world. We should have a much more vocal voice, but we don't at the moment, I don't believe, not as strong as it could be. And I would hope that, you know, we can push that. We don't promote ourselves enough either for that, but it does bother me that we are at the moment taken away from other countries. We're not necessarily always looking back at what we should be giving them. And particularly now that you've got the British Council funding cut, you've got international aid cut, all of those things that people would tap into, the Erasmus system all being moved, all of those things could be tapped into by nurses and by students to be able to give back to the rest of the world and learn, because it's that sharing of information, it's that sharing of practice, it's that sharing of learning. I have no problem with nurses coming here from other countries and working here for 5 years and then perhaps going back to their country and taking all that knowledge and expertise with them to benefit their country. There's nothing wrong with that, but I think we've got a way to go. Hello. Night night, darling.
Thanks, Maria. And Denise?
So I'll be clearly all of us support ethical recruitment and all of those issues that are made. We also support international opportunities across the world for people to move around. I think the thing the RCN needs to do is get much forum for the voice of our international nurses, because they're not, you know, they're not one homogeneous group. There's lots of differences, and I think the group of international nurses could tell us very well what the issues are. We know the issues are particularly around and the we can't speak on behalf of the group that are not here telling us what their issues are, and I think we deserve, but we really need to hear it and do something collectively. We've got a big college. I think we could do something about some of these issues.
Absolutely. Thanks very much, Denise. Your internet's gone a little, I don't know if it's your internet or my internet, it's gone a little bit wobbly there, but thank you. And one of our Northwest board members, in fact, is just setting up a group at the moment for international nursing students who've identified that they're actually in an unusual position and sometimes in quite a lonely position. So we've kind of recognised that at board level and are doing something about that. So hopefully we can do something across the country. Maggie, have you got another quick question there, really quick?
Sorry, yes, I have. Right. Sorry. As the RCN are becoming more member-led and members are asking for transparency, how would you as president work to ensure that we receive that transparency?
Lovely. Denise?
Well, I think I've worked time as a member and also as a member of staff. I think what is probably more important than any set of behaviours around the way we respect each other, we're kind to each other, we respect each other's opinions, we recognise that we can't represent everybody and have consensus all of the time, so we are able to have different views, and we're able to be very respectful in that, and we recognise all of the evidence about civility. And I think principles of kindness and good, well-led framework for both council and for the staff, I think is the way to go. I've done quite a lot of work about what makes a well-led organisation and how people can trust that. I believe very strongly that the Royal College of Legislation should be member-led, managerially supported, and there should be mutual for both sides. I recognise that there's been some turbulent times, but actually an opportunity to come together on shared purpose, align some of the areas that we have constructive differences, and sometimes we're not always going to agree, but we're representative of a very wide nursing family. I think we can do some technical things, some framework things, but actually at the bottom line, good governance comes from very, very good, open, trusted relationships and good, kind, supportive behaviours of each other, in my view.
Lovely, thank you. Maria? Oh, you're on mute, my lovely.
I'll find it. It's so you can't hear me coughing. I've got hay fever. Well, I'd say yes to all of that. I think we actually have to be much more open in what we publish. I think certainly having the more of council, on an open agenda and filmed, so that people can actually watch and take part at the time. I'd actually like to introduce something that was introduced and what engaged me as a member and to become more active at the time was actually as a lay member being able to be a lay participant on a committee, to see how a committee worked and to be able to speak at that committee. It didn't have a vote, but it was a sort of an appointment process of being able to sit on a committee and take part in it. And that showed me how the governance worked at the RCN. So it actually taught me a lot about that. And I think more of those opportunities for members, not to just observe a committee meeting, but actually to be able to actively participate at times would be better. But I think we need to publish more and faster. I think technology gives us a huge boon for that. I think the town hall council process is an interesting one to work for. AGM, not a big fan of it being online, because I don't think you're as able to engage as you are when you are in person. So again, those sort of things all help. But actually, I would like also at council meetings for members to be able to actually ask questions in those. So like we do tonight, where you put your hand up or you put something into the chat when the council meeting's being held on particular items, I'd like members to be able to actively engage at the time. And I think more that people can do that, the more it makes things a bit more transparent, and to be able to come in and look. And it's a challenge, but I think it has to be done. And as I said, I want the governance reviews that have taken place, I want them in place. Because we are 3 years on from some of them and we're still waiting for some of those things to be done. And again, to be more transparent is to enable members to actually take part in some of those policy decisions as well at times, which we don't do, and I would like to have a bit more.
Lovely. Thanks, Maria. And Rod?
Yeah, combination of things. And just reflecting some of the things that Denise and Maria have said. Yes, we have to have situations where very little occurs in whether it's our boards, councils, or senior committees that is in private, and that if it is in private, we have to be able to explain quite clearly what is confidential about it, and whether that's a time-limited confidentiality, so that people have confidence that what's being done on their behalf is genuinely being done on their behalf. The more that's done in secret, the more likely it is that people will not have the confidence in the system. The other aspect of it is that we have had created a culture whereby our spokespeople all too often are our officers, whether it's the General Secretary, the Director for England, Director for Scotland, the Specialist Spokesperson on Infection Prevention and Control. And we haven't utilised the knowledge and skills of our members. So the perception that that many members will get of the organisation is that it is led by the officers. Now, we're doing them a disservice by putting them in that position, but we should also be exposing the people that we elect to speaking on our behalf and to be engaging more. So things such as the town hall events that Maria highlighted, the Q&A sessions that we've introduced in the West Midlands, which are open to all. There's no agenda other than, have you got a question? Do you want to ask it? Has to be part of the process that opens up the college at all levels, whether it's at branch level, board level, council level, and that people have confidence that they can do as Marie was suggesting of listening, but not feel under pressure to ask a question. But equally that they have the confidence that they know who their council member is, they know who their trade union committee member is, they know who their professional nursing or board member is, and they feel that they can engage with them without fear or favour. That's the transformation that we have to have. And it also has to be that any of the major policy decisions really have to be co-produced so that members can have the confidence that actually they had a say in developing those things. And it applies to the governance review, but it develops the policy so that rather than having things which are done by the officers, and I appreciate to a high standard, so it's not a criticism of the officers, but it doesn't feel that our members in the forum, our specialist members in the branches, have any real buy-in to those things that have been produced. Unless we can do that, unless we can make that transformation, we won't be a member-led organisation, and people have to have that confidence that we truly are transforming the RCN to be more agile, more member-led, and we're using the expertise that our members have. And there was a brilliant example of it on the virtual march, where we had a range of people speaking so articulately, and including yourself, Carmel, about what the issues were, and not an officer in sight. And that, again, that's not to criticise the officers, but if we're to be truly member-led, it should be the members speaking up more often and telling their stories in the way that Denise, Maria and I were articulating earlier on. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Rod. And I think we're certainly very lucky in this region, and our offices, and we abuse them at a shocking, rate of knots, and we put on monthly branch meetings and make them attend and make them sort out virtual congresses for us, and they do so, at the drop of a hat. So we are very lucky, and I think that comes back again to member engagement, doesn't it? And that's what certainly us as a branch and across the Northwest are trying to do. To be the voice of nursing, we need to hear the voice of our members, and it's about engaging them at every level. And I think sometimes things can be a little bit intimidating. The first time I went to Congress, I was completely overwhelmed, and it wasn't until I'd kind of started to put my big girl pants on and go and speak to a few people that actually you realise these are my peers, and it's not difficult to get involved. So it's about kind of getting that message across, and certainly what we're trying to do as a branch. So thank you very much to everybody for coming this evening and for letting us grill you as our presidential candidates.
It's been fun.
Voting is coming along soon. I'm going to hand you over to Mike for a last word, but thank you very much to everyone for coming.
Thank you.
I always get the last word. It's so unfair. I just want to say on behalf of the branch and the Northwest region is to Rod, to Maria, to Denise, thanks for really coming along to this today, because we created this because we had an opportunity. We had a branch meeting tonight, and it was really important that this presidential campaign got a lot more coverage than the last one, and more positive coverage than the last one. And as one who stood for president in the past, I know how hard it is to canvass and to try and keep your voices heard in the whole mishmash of what's going on around health these days. But I think on behalf of the branch especially, we'd like to wish all three of you, to have a good campaign. I hope I hope at the end of it, at the day, my advice I always give to people who stand for election is this, is that your expectations of success should only be matched by your expectations of failure. But the important thing to come out of it is, there's a huge value that you do to our membership. And I hope you realise that, as time goes by, and if you are unsuccessful, you've gained a lot out of this because you've been communicating and engaging with a range of staff from the Northwest, and we're not the easiest people to get onto when we get into politics. But thank you very, very, very much, and we'll see you sometime or other, most probably at Congress in Liverpool.
Fingers crossed.
Open, and we're all starting to, and we'll see you there. But take care, stay negative in a sort of positive way, and and good luck in your election campaigns. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much,
for having
everyone.
us.
Thank you.
Bye
Bye now.
Bye.